Okay, so here we go with our first lecture, Introduction to Physiology. In the lecture notes, I believe it's called First Day, which conveniently happens the first day. So let's kind of go ahead and run through the slides and see what happens. Since anatomy is a prerequisite for this course, as it's some sort of chemistry course, we should probably define anatomy first, and oftentimes we'll be using anatomy in this course as a guide to kind of figure out the physiology, and structure and function are highly related. So theoretically you have the knowledge from anatomy course and be able to apply it to the function of the human body. So anatomy is the study of structure. If you took anatomy here at DVC, we often teach a functional anatomy, although you do learn a lot of the structural stuff as well. Physiology, on the other hand, is a study of function. They are intimately related, and some colleges teach, instead of a one-semester anatomy and a one-semester physiology, teach a two-semester anatomy and physiology combined course. They are related to such a degree that they depend on each other. And you can kind of think about it this way. It's somewhat humorous. Structure without function is a corpse. In the cadaver room at DVC, we have a number of cadavers that we would use to study anatomy. However, in physiology, we don't look at them because there is no function there. So it's great for structure, but there's no function within a cadaver or corpse. And go the other way and say, oh, function without structure is a ghost. And so, not that I necessarily believe in ghosts, but it's just kind of an interesting way to think about it. So physiology is a normal subject that we'll study, but oftentimes under the umbrella of anatomy. So looking at these slide, right, since anatomy is a prerequisite, what is the major structure shown here? So looking either here or here, right, you would say, oh, that's the knee, right? So for the knee joint, right, we have the femur and the tibia and the fibula over here. And what do you notice about this picture? And you don't have anything wrong with it. So looking at the next one, let's compare it to a normal structure. So this side over here are normal knees, and this side over here are actually my knees. So this is probably the more important structure. And notice right here on the medial side, there is no separation. And for those of you that have studied a little bit about x-rays, probably understand that the cartilage does not show in an x-ray. And so looking here, the separation between the tibia and the femur, right, shows the person has intact cartilage, the menisci. But for me, I don't have any medial meniscus, and my lateral meniscus is not much there either, although because of how the bone sits, it is raised off a little higher than it is because of the abnormality, right? So if we were in a face-to-face class, the structure of my knee would dictate my function. And so I'd limp around, and hard for me to stand for hours on end anymore because it just causes too much pain. So it's a good example of what we call pathophysiology, right? Patho refers to a disease process, and physiology is function. So pathophysiology we'll talk a little bit about as we go through the semester. But for those that you get into more medical type programs, you'll have to take pathophysiology as part of your course load. As a matter of fact, for those of you that go to nursing school, usually your first semester, the two major classes that you take are pharmacology and pathophysiology. So that's kind of a look at how structure affects function as well, at least from a pathological standpoint. So animal form and function are highly correlated. And anatomy, again, is the form, that's the structure, and physiology is the function. So let's kind of look at a little bit of the structure and how it dictates function. So this organism is a jackrabbit, right? And you can kind of tell that by these big, huge ears. And I like this picture a lot for a number of reasons. But, you know, what's up with the big ears? Well, jackrabbits you usually find in environments like the desert where it's very hot. Unlike humans, rabbits don't have sweat glands, so we can't use evaporative cooling through sweating. So one of the ways they stay cool is by panting, breathing out heat, but also by having these very, very large ears. And this is a great picture because in the sun you can kind of see the vascularization within their ears. And by changing blood flow to the ears, they can dissipate heat or retain heat based on the blood flow there. So the big ears, right, their structure, right, helps determine their function, the cooling of the body and not overheating in terms of their body temperature. Now, a couple of things. I like to look back at a little bit of history sometimes and talk a little bit about people who are important in physiology and in the field and kind of understand where they're coming from so that we can sometimes understand where we're going. So one of the things I think is kind of interesting is just visit the history of physiology a little bit. Physiology is a normalized science. We'll study it in class. A long time ago, it was called biophysics, okay, and biochemistry. But now we call it physiology. But physiology hasn't always been that way. And you know, most of human history, humans, once we were able to evolve enough to have this type of thought in our brains, right, our structure, right, allowed our function in terms of higher level thinking, that humans, you know, want to know how they worked, especially in relation to diseases and things like that. So as an example, historically, there are a lot of societies that had ailments for common problems. In Egypt, as an example, camel dung, camel poop, basically, was used as a common remedy for a lot of ailments in early Egypt. The ancient Greeks used to look at different things from a very scientific standpoint, and they had like almost 50 different descriptions of urine. And so they would pee in some sort of vessel and then study it, everything from color and turbidity and how it reacted with other things, and you know, even the taste. And actually, many early societies knew about diabetes. We'll study diabetes this semester. We'll look at a glucose tolerance test lab, and we'll look at measuring glucose in one of our earlier labs this semester. And we'll kind of use blood glucose levels as one of our main examples for homeostasis. And so I think most of you probably know that the inability to maintain your blood glucose at proper levels ends up in a disease called diabetes. The ancient Greeks knew about diabetes, and they knew it from testing urine. They didn't know it was a problem with insulin production or insulin response. They just knew that if you had sugar in your urine, you weren't probably going to live as long. You know, the early American Indians knew about it, and if they thought somebody had diabetes, they would have them pee on a stick and take the stick to an anthill and put it next to an anthill and then come back later. And if the ants were all crawling all over the stick, they knew that there was something wrong. We didn't know how to fix it back then, but you know, we understood that the disease process would severely shorten life. Before we developed the injectable insulins to help control diabetes, the average type 1 diabetic, they used to call it juvenile onset. Most type 1 diabetics are diagnosed earlier, usually before age 20, especially back then. And they had a lifespan that was probably less than 50 years for most of them, and many of them died of cardiovascular disease in their 40s because we just didn't control blood sugar very well back then. So, we've studied a lot of disease processes and tried to figure out what made humans sick so that we can make humans feel better. So, one of the earlier figures that really kind of started to put physiology on the map in terms of a science was Aristotle. And Aristotle actually defined physiology as the knowledge of nature. Now, what's kind of interesting about that is we don't use that definition anymore, right? For physiology, we're talking about the functioning of some living organism, right? And usually an animal. We might apply that to biology nowadays and studying knowledge of nature. But the earliest definition of physiology that we can find was Aristotle's definition and the knowledge of nature. Now, after Aristotle came Hippocrates. Many of you have probably heard about Hippocrates. Hippocrates is known sometimes as the first doctor, sometimes called the father of medicine. Physicians take the Hippocratic Oath as they become physicians and licensed in the United States. And since Hippocrates had that kind of medical bent, he termed physiology the healing power of nature. And so he was kind of the first person to associate the functioning of the human body with physiology. And to be honest, not much happened for, almost 2,000 years. Not quite, but a long time. And eventually, in the 1600s, sometimes that's called the Age of Enlightenment, physiology became an important area of scientific study, but it certainly lagged behind other disciplines. One of the things I think is really interesting and certainly is based on technology as much as anything, is that humans can scientifically prove that the Earth revolves around the sun. The sun's 93 million miles away from the Earth. At an earlier point in our history, before we knew that and can prove blood circulated through the body. And the major reasoning for that is technology, right? In order to demonstrate the Earth revolves around the sun, you need a telescope. And basically, not quite, but if you turn a telescope upside down, it becomes a microscope. And in order to prove that blood circulates in the body, you would need a microscope. And obviously, since we knew about the Earth going around the sun at an earlier date, it's not surprising that we invented the telescope as a group of people on Earth before the microscope. So certainly technology will play a role in what we see. Now, when we study physiology this semester, it has a very broad scope. We have these different levels of organization that we will look at. And when you look at biology in general, which is really the study of life, bio refers to life, right? Ology is study of. So biology is a study of life. And when we look at biology, we can kind of see that there are certain parts of biology that overlap with other parts. And physiology tends to kind of overlap a lot with a number of different scientific studies. So we have what we often refer to as the levels of organization. And shown here on this slide are the levels of organization. And you could even look at it in a different light if you wanted, by even going backwards. So in class, we're going to talk about atoms, which we put together to become molecules. But even before that, we can look at the subatomic particles, right? And you know what those are, the three major parts that make up an atom. And we don't care about some of the other things. If we were in certain levels of physics or chemistry, become more important. But anything below the subatomic particles at this point in time we don't think has a broad influence on physiology, so don't worry about those. But for the atoms, the subatomic particles, the neutrons, protons, and electrons that make up the atom. And we'll talk about it a little bit in a future lecture, and certainly responsible for a number of these aspects in the basic chemistry section. That's not going to have a lecture that you have to study on your own, but posted on Canvas. That the subatomic particles dictate to a large extent how different atoms behave. And so understanding how many electrons there are and how many electrons can fill the outer shell, and understanding how proton and their numbers can't change, but neutrons can. And when you have a different number of neutrons, you have an isotope. So those are the types of things that would become important for us from a physiological point of view in level organization. So even on this schematic, we can go back, one level. So we put those subatomic particles together, we get to the level of atoms. Atoms are kind of a general name of things. If we talk about specific atoms, those are what we call elements. So like oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, those would be our atoms or elements. And we can stick those together. And if we stick atoms together, we get into molecules. Molecules are just different atoms stuck together, like chemically H2O, water, would be a level that we would talk about. And then we can stick molecules together in certain ways. And if you wanted to, and how serious you wanted to get, in between molecules and cells, you could put organelles, right? Those are the small functional structural units of a cell. But for molecules, we typically jump to cells. Cells are considered the smallest unit of life. We have something called the cell theory, where unless you're made up of a cell or cells, you're not considered to be living. As an example, obviously, coronaviruses are a big deal right now. And since the virus doesn't fit all the criteria for living things, and it's not quite a cell, it's not considered to be living. So cells are considered to be the smallest unit of life, and every living organism is made up of cells or cell. And then if we take cells and stick them together, we get to the level of tissues. There's 4 principal tissues in the human body. Right? So hopefully you've learned that in anatomy, and that's some knowledge you hopefully carry forward. So I'll give you a second to think about it. What are the 4 principal types of tissues? I'm waiting. You can say them out loud if you need to. All right, so the 4 principal types of tissue, right? I like to do it this way because I think it's a little easier for me. So I think, usually when people think of tissue, I think epithelial tissue. Most students get that. So we have epithelial tissue. We have muscular tissue, we have nervous tissue, and then we have the category that sort of catches everything that's left, and that's connective tissue. We're not going to worry that much about tissue because you probably studied it in great detail in anatomy, but we do have tissues. If we have the standard definition, it works pretty well for things. A great definition of tissues is a collection of cells with a specific purpose or purposes. And we can just keep on using that definition and applying it to the next level of organization. So since tissues are a collection of cells with a specific purpose or purposes, guess what organs are? Organs are a collection of tissues with a specific purpose or purposes. What's an organ system? The next level. A group of organs, right, with a specific function or functions. What's an organism? A group of organ systems that have specific functions. So, we can just keep on using the same definition as we go up to the different levels. Once we get to the level of organisms, we often look at the populations. Population is, by definition, a single species. Sometimes more often than not, the proper definition of a population is same group, same place, same time. So that becomes important. And then you get to all sorts of different things in the ecology level, where you look at communities and then ecosystems, and eventually the biosphere. The biosphere is any place in, on, or above the Earth. That's the biosphere part. I guess that's the sphere part of it, where an organism can live. Live is the bio part. So biosphere is anywhere in, on, or above the Earth where an organism can live. So it's sort of, a nice little continuum in terms of the levels of organization that we have. In physiology, again, this is from a textbook, but I would extend it back because we're going to talk about chemistry. So this little red line, I would go over here. And matter of fact, if it was me making this, I would have subatomic particles here. And I have that red line go up to the population of species. And certainly populations matter, especially for looking at a lot of different things, especially for disease in a population or things like that. Like epidemiology or something. So we're going to spend most of our time, though, in this middle area here, where we're going to be talking largely about organ systems. And that's sort of the area we're going to spend. But at the beginning of the semester, we're going to start way here on the left and kind of work our way through. And then as we kind of go through these different things, we'll spend a large portion of the semester on what they call systemic physiology, looking at the systems, the organ systems, as we go through it. So a couple other things to kind of remember is one of the things that becomes difficult in studying a large portion of physiology sometimes are when we come across what we call these emergent properties. Now, an emergent property is a property of a system that results from the interaction of components. And basically, it's when the system is greater than the sum of their parts. It's sometimes easier to give an example than it is a definition. And this, I think, one of those cases. So as an example, a great example of an emergent property would be the nervous system, and especially the central nervous system, right? So we can do studies, and we understand that if we ask you to remember something 5 minutes from now and image your brain while you're trying to remember what we told you 5 minutes later, there's certain parts of your brain that become active. If we give you the same information and say we're going to ask you 6 months from now what that is, then your brain actually works differently to process that information and to put it in this long-term storage, basically, as opposed to the short-term memory. And so we have a pretty good idea where that's happening and what neurotransmitters are being released and what electrical signals are coming from and going and how they're generated and things like that. But the whole system is much more complex than those individual parts. And so the nervous system is a great example of that, and especially the brain, right? And that's true of memory and learning and emotion and all those things as well. So, one of the things that, we have to remember are these emergent properties, all right? Now, when we go and look at the levels of organization, here's kind of a quick little review of things and a look at it from a same standpoint, but more of a pictorial thing. So this is basically an atom, right? And this atom has electrons that go around the outside, right? And then the protons and neutrons in the nucleus. So those are the subatomic particles, and together they make an atom. If we put atoms together, we get the level of a molecule, right? It's supposed to be a representation of a benzene ring. So, carbons at each one of these intervals. And then the next level of organization, right, would be molecules, right? So, so subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, and then we put the molecules together, we get into the level of cells. We'll also be responsible for cells on the first exam, but again, like the basic chemistry. We'll do some chemistry in class, but the basic chemistry you'll be responsible for on your own. If we put cells together, we get to tissues, right? So tissues. So tissues, again, are a group of cells with specific functions. We get tissues together, right? We go ahead and look at organs, right? So as an example, the lungs would be considered an organ. Then if you wanted to look at this whole picture, and actually it should go up and have a nose and a mouth as well as the rest of the pharynx and things like that, would be an organ system. Right? We put organ systems together, we get to the level of an organism. Now, this is just, yeah, if you look, you can see tiny people here, right? But that's just a reminder that, even though it's a human physiology class, there's other organisms, right, that we have to deal with, and even plants are considered organisms, right? And then we look at a population, right? So same species, here's a whole bunch of penguins, right, in the same place at the same time. Communities and ecosystems are a little bit different, but basically an ecosystem are interacting groups of populations, right, that also interact with each other and their physical and chemical environments. And then eventually get to the biosphere, again, any place on, in, or above the earth where an organism can live. Now, one of the other things that makes physiology study a little more difficult is physiology is an integrative science. Our organ systems are not functionally isolated, and they depend on each other in order to function properly. And so in many ways, they are integrated units. And we'll see an example of that with the way we're going to define the organ systems themselves in a little while. So as an example, what organ system or systems protect us from infection? We go, okay, well, you might have learned this in anatomy. You probably didn't learn this in anatomy because it's a functional system. But oftentimes in physiology, we'll say, okay, the system that keeps us free from infection is the immune system, right? So what is the immune system made up of? Well, the immune system is made up of a whole bunch of different things, and that includes most of the things seen here on this chart. And really simple, the immune system's got a couple major parts. Certainly the integumentary system is important, right? That's your skin and its derivatives that help keep bacteria and other microorganisms like viruses out of your body, right? Your circulatory system is very important in terms of the immune system, right? And in anatomy, hopefully you learned and remember that we have white blood cells in the circulatory system that help in the terms of immune function, as well as other chemicals that travel around the body, like complement. So that helps, keeps us free from disease. Another important one is the lymphatic system, right? So we have lymph nodes and things like that, not even listed here, I don't see it, right? Where that helps us, keeps us free from disease as well. But even going a little bit deeper, our respiratory system and our digestive system and our urinary system typically keep us free from disease. So as an example, men hardly ever get urinary tract infections, while women, it's much, much more common. And it has two major reasons why. The first reason is the female anatomy. The second reason is the length of the urethra. In order to get a urinary tract infection, typically what happens is you have bacteria that move what they call retrograde, backwards through the urethra and then into the bladder. For women, the urethra is really, really, really short, and so it does not take a huge amount of time for bacteria, even though they're so tiny, to move from outside the urethra to in and then into the bladder. For males, it's a much, much longer trip because urethra goes up and around the bladder and everything else. So that urethra is a much longer trip, and usually the urine stream washes out bacteria from a male. As a matter of fact, if a male has a urinary tract infection, they often first look, depending on age, for prostate problems, as an example, because it's relatively uncommon. So, you could even say that the other systems help protect us, right? Hey, you eat something bad that's got some sort of bacteria in it. What happens? You end up throwing up, as an example, which again is sort of that protective mechanism. And you've got acidic environment in your digestive system. There's a whole bunch of different ways to protect us from infection. What enables reproduction? Well, that one's an easy one. I see it right here, the reproductive system, right? But what determines the reproductive system and how it operates? Well, certainly the endocrine system plays a huge role, right? As a matter of fact, in many cases, if we want to disrupt reproduction, we often use hormones, right, especially with females, to change reproductive cycles so that women don't get pregnant. So, there's certainly an interaction and integrative portion there. What do we do for maintain acid-base balance, right? We'll kind of mention it later, but the pH of the human body is pretty close to 7.4, right? So a little more basic than neutral. And that can't change much. If it goes down below 7.35 or above 7.45, we're said to have a disease, either acidosis on the one side or alkalosis on the other. So if we need to maintain acid-base balance, we have to be able to get rid of acid or base. So how are we going to go ahead and do that? Well, we can either pee it out, right? So the urinary system is very important for that. If we want to get rid of acid, we can put literally acid into the urine eventually and pee it out. Or if we want to keep acid for some reason, if our blood is too basic, we can pull it out of what's eventually become urine and hold on to it. The other way to get and change acid-base balance is breathing, your respiratory system. We'll see it in the first week of lab that CO2 acts as an acid in your blood. So when you breathe in CO2, it has a chemical reaction when it hits the water in your blood, which is, your blood is at least 50 and probably closer to 60% water. It reacts, the CO2 reacts with the water and forms something called carbonic acid. And that carbonic acid breaks up, dissociates, if you want to use a chemical term, into hydrogen ion, that's an H+. And then you also get HCO3-, which is bicarbonate. And by breathing more or breathing less, we can increase or decrease how much acid we have in the body. So the two systems that maintain acid-base balance primarily are the respiratory and the urinary systems, although certainly other systems will play a role in that, but much smaller. So, great examples of some of the interdependency within the different organ systems. A couple other kind of things to remember in terms of the integration. When we look at humans and how they function, some books use the term cardiorespiratory system. And even nowadays, and it's changed a little bit for someone who's a layperson, but for a professional rescuer, a lifeguard, a medic, a paramedic, a nurse, a doctor, those professionals, they typically teach CPR still. But for the community-based CPR, they don't do CPR anymore. But the idea is that it doesn't do any good, right, to have the heart beating and pumping blood if there's no oxygen in it, right? But it doesn't do any good to have oxygen in the blood if it's not flowing. And so, generally speaking, right, you do the cardio stuff, the heart, that's the pump, and the respiratory part, right, in order to oxygenate the blood. Now, studies have shown that because lay people don't do a very good job of CPR, if they're trying to do both things, nowadays for community-based CPR, they generally just teach you how to do compressions and don't worry about the breaths, and that's because there's usually enough oxygen in the blood to sustain life, and they find that that's much simpler and people are less likely to screw it up, basically. Another thing that we see sometimes in medicine is what we call individual differences. And when we look at values, or what's called normal values in terms, especially in lab, for example, those are average values. And what average values typically mean is, on average, about half the people are going to be higher and about half the people are going to be lower. Now, there's certain things that don't fit that, but we may see different responses from different individuals because it reflects, genetic and environmental influences that influence those numbers. So be careful with making too many assumptions about different things, and people can be normal yet not fit the normative value that we're looking at. And especially for those who get into medicine, it's something to remember. One of the other things we see is sometimes, based on these normative values, is what we call an ecological fallacy. So an ecological fallacy is sort of like a scientific stereotype. And what it does is it attributes the trait of a group to an individual. And so, a common example you would see is, middle school kids go through the DARE program, right? The anti-drug program. And oftentimes one of the things they'll hear in that program is they'll say, on average, for every cigarette you smoke, right, you lose 3 minutes off your life. And that's a common statistic you see. Well, telling somebody that you see smoking a cigarette and go, oh, you're going to die 3 minutes earlier now because you're smoking a cigarette, is an ecological fallacy, right? You turn on the morning news shows and, they're celebrating, some woman's 110th birthday. And like, oh, how do you live so long? Well, I make sure I smoke a pack of cigarettes and drink a pint of whiskey a day. So, that's certainly not the recipe we would think for a long life. For that person, it works. So telling them that they're going to, lose time off their life by, smoking cigarettes, you can't tell it to a specific person. You can say, on average, we would expect you to have a lower lifespan, but for that person, it may not lower that. Or, as an example, if someone was going to get run over by a bus at noon, right, and they smoke a cigarette, now they're going to get run over by a bus at 11:57. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So, be careful of ecological fallacies and attributing the groups to those things. So, just because someone's overweight doesn't mean they're going to have a heart attack, right? They can still have very normal, healthy heart and vessels and things like that. So you can tell somebody they're higher risk, right? Just because you have higher cholesterol doesn't mean you're going to have a heart attack, right? And again, it just all gets to risk, but you can't tell an individual, oh, you're going to die of a heart attack because you have high cholesterol. So try to stay away from these ecological fallacies. Another, common thing we probably should talk about is the idea of what's called teleology versus mechanism. Those are opposing viewpoints of life that attempt to explain natural phenomenon. And, I think it's easier, even though it's a relatively newer view of life, and to do the mechanistic view first and then explain teleology. So the mechanistic view, or sometimes known as mechanism, says that all natural phenomenon can be explained through physical and chemical laws. So basically, it's the scientific view we have of things, right? What's the evidence? We have physical laws, we have chemical laws, and that's why this occurs. The teleological view, which is sometimes known as teleology, holds that some additional force other than physical and chemical laws is required to explain the function of living organisms. Okay? So something else is there, or teleology can also be used to describe a situation where human purpose is attributed to something that is not human. Right? So one of the big terms that we use this semester will be homeostasis. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you right now, if you remember one thing this semester, you should remember homeostasis, right? It's the maintenance of a constant internal environment. All right? And that homeostasis is an important aspect of physiology, maintaining that constant internal conditions that the body works best at. So, let's say you're out social distancing with friends, and one of them asks, okay, so what'd you learn this week in physiology? And you say, oh, I learned that, homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant internal environment so that the workings within a human stay within normal levels. And they ask, well, why? Well, then a common answer would be, well, because the body wants to, right? And that's a teleological statement, right? The body doesn't want to do anything. It maintains homeostasis because the body best operates at homeostasis. And so try to stay away from teleology, although I'll probably use it a number of times this semester because sometimes it's just easier to explain things. Another good example of teleology versus mechanism is like an earthquake. All right. So, let's say we have an earthquake here in California, right? Then you'll probably see someone from, Caltech on, the TV talking about the plate sliding and, doing this and talking about what type of earthquake it is and why it generates so much, power and force, and what's the likelihood of a bigger one coming in the next, hour, 24 hours, 2 weeks, whatever. And so there's, the mechanistic view, and someone who has a teleological view would say, oh man, we did something to get some god mad at us, and now they're causing the earth to shake, right? And so that would be a more teleological point of view. So the mechanistic view, again, is the more scientific view, while the teleological view is more of a viewpoint than anything else. And in the past, especially 100 years, the mechanistic view has come to be more and more important as more and more evidence supported it. So we're going to try to use the mechanistic view when we can. Just to kind of clear things up a little bit, I'll give you one more example. When my wife and I first moved into the house that we bought after we were married, which I'm sitting in right now, dictating this lecture, we were just sitting there hanging out, and it was later in the evening, and a can fell out of one of our cupboards. It just, landed on the counter and then fell on the floor, very loud noise, and you think, oh my God, what's going on, right? So I go to the kitchen and see the can, and me as a scientist have a mechanistic view, and I said, oh, gravity, right? The can couldn't float up in the air, and when it rolled off the shelf, it fell. My wife, being more of a non-scientist, had a teleological view, and her explanation was, oh my God, we have a ghost. And so, that's kind of two very, opposing viewpoints, but we're going to try to stay with the mechanistic view in this class when we can. Now, there's a whole bunch of ways to break up the organ systems. And we're going to use a similar functional way to break them down. This is actually done by Silverthorne in her text. But I don't like to use the one in our textbook because the anatomy and physiology textbook that we use from OpenStax has an anatomy breakdown. So it's a structural breakdown, but we want a functional breakdown. And we'll see that difference come out a couple times this semester when we will talk about functionally how we categorize things versus structurally how we categorize things. And so we're going to go with 10 human organ systems. And there's nothing magical about 10, except that if I ask you about them on the exam, these are the ones I want you to know. I have a book in my office that claims there's 13 human organ systems. I have a book in my office that claims there's 8. But most places give somewhere in the neighborhood between 10 and 11, maybe even 12. You'll kind of see what the one we have makes some assumptions about certain organs systems and kind of groups them together a little bit. So on the slide, you can see that we have 5 listed here in red and 5 listed here in blue. And the idea is these first 5, we'll kind of talk about them in a second, the circulatory, endocrine, nervous, respiratory, and urinary, or renal, those we're going to spend a little bit of time on this semester. We're going to get into some pretty deep detail, especially for the circulatory system. I think from a point of view where most of you are going to end up, where most of you are taking this class to move on to some sort of professional program, circulatory system is very important in terms of understanding things. So those 5 we're going to spend pretty much detail. The ones in blue here, we're going to hit them all at some point in time, but we're not going to go into nearly as much detail. And part of it is going to be because you've done some of that detail in some of your other classes, like, the musculoskeletal system. We're going to talk about a little bit, but more from a functional standpoint. But the bottom 5, we're going to have some very quick conversations about those systems and not really worry about them a whole lot later on. So let's go through them. And again, this is no particular order. It is. It's the 5 and the 5 that are alphabetical. Okay, so the circulatory system is the first one. I actually like the term cardiovascular, but it's another good chance to kind of show the difference between structure and function. Circulatory system is a functional name. It tells us what happens with the blood. It circulates through the body. Cardiovascular is a structural name. Okay, but if you know cardiovascular, I have a pretty good idea what we're talking about. Cardio means heart. Vascular means vessel. And what's in the heart and vessels are the blood. So the cardiovascular has 3 basic components: the heart, the blood, and the vessels. And its major function is to transport materials between different cells in the body. So, oxygen in, CO2 out, and certainly, nutrients to cells and waste away for cells. So it has some other things too that we'll talk about, maintaining immunity, right, in terms of things. So the cardiovascular system has an immune function, helps to regulate temperature, things like that. So this is one of the major functions, and that's what we look at there for the circulatory. Next one's endocrine system. I think sometimes students don't get a good idea of exactly some of the endocrine system, even from their experiences in anatomy. I think all students know that some of our endocrine glands, right, produce hormones, right? In fact, that's by definition what they do. But also there are cellular components of different organs that, not considered glands, that can also produce hormones. So cells and glands help produce endocrines, or things we call hormones. The function of hormones are to coordinate function through the synthesis and release of regulatory molecules. And in fact, the endocrine system is one of the major systems that is responsible for maintaining homeostasis. So as an example, later on, we'll talk about homeostasis of glucose and how do we keep glucose at a normal level. Well, it's between 2 antagonistic hormones that play a large role in it, insulin and glucagon, that help to maintain the normal level of glucose in the body. So that's the endocrine system. The nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord, as well as probably should put it on the slide actually, the nerves that go to and from it, right? So as an example, I think most of you remember from anatomy, right, that there are nerves in the brain. We call them cranial nerves, right? How many pairs of cranial nerves do we have? Give you a second to think about it. All right, so there's a dozen, right? So, you probably learned them and probably went to a lot of detail about which ones were motor and which ones were sensory and which were both, right? And you probably didn't learn how many spinal nerves there are, right? There's 31 pairs of spinal nerves as well. So what's the function of the nervous system? It's to coordinate function through electrical signals and regulatory molecules and help to maintain homeostasis, right? And we'll really kind of look at the function of the nervous system from a very basic standpoint when we talk about it. So sensory, right? Being able to sense things is an important component of the nervous system. The integration part of it, to be able to take information in and process it, right? That's integration. And then there's a motor or response end where you can react to it and, send a gland a signal to release a hormone, or send a muscle a signal to contract, or whatever we need to do. So that's the nervous. The respiratory system is important. It's made up of the lungs and the airways primarily. Its major function is to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, right? But I talked earlier about this in the video, that the acid-base balance is very important, right? So maintaining blood pH is an important component of the respiratory system. There's a few other things as well, like vocalization. You can hear me right now in this video because of the respiratory system, right? I send air across my vocal cords and that causes them to vibrate, and you can hear what I'm saying. So that's the respiratory system. The next one's the urinary system. Components of the urinary system are the kidneys and the bladder primarily, and then the tubes that lead from them, right? So the ureters and the urethra. The function of the urinary system is many. We'll actually talk about 6 major functions later on in the semester, and we talk about it in detail. I had a course in college. I think we did 53 functions of the urinary system, if I remember right. But the major ones are to maintain the water levels, maintain the levels of different ions in the body, to remove waste, and for acid-base balance. So, and again, we can pee out or not pee out hydrogen ion, which really is our measure of acid. So just as a quick review, right? There are 2 systems that are responsible for maintaining homeostasis from a major point of view. That's the endocrine and the nervous. There are also 2 systems primarily that are responsible for maintaining acid-base balance, and that would be the respiratory and renal. Right? So moving on with our other set of 5, and this video's run a little long, but we're going to be done in a few minutes, so I figure I'll let it run. I like video time to be somewhere between 40 and 60 minutes if I can. And we'll be up against it for the 60, but I think we'll be okay. So the digestive system, the major components of the digestive system, which is sometimes known as the gastrointestinal or GI for gastrointestinal tract, consists of the tube basically between your mouth and your other side, your anus, and the accessory structures like your liver and gallbladder and teeth and things like that. All the different glands that release different hormones or different chemicals that allow us to process food and assimilate the nutrients. So the digestive system is your stomach, your intestines, your liver, your pancreas, and among other structures. The function is to process food for energy, right? We have to eat to take energy in. We have to uptake nutrients, and we have to eliminate waste. That's sort of a misnomer. The digestive system eliminates stuff that wasn't absorbed, but we don't really stick much into the digestive system to get rid of it. The vast majority of things that end up being eliminated by the digestive system were things that were put there by eating. The major exception are some of the ions in water. But the bottom line is that most of our waste elimination is just stuff that was already in the digestive tract that we didn't get a chance to absorb for whatever reason. The next one is that complicated one. It's the functional system. It's called the immune system. It is made up of the lymphatic system, right? It's made up of the integumentary system. It's made up of the cardiovascular system as well. So it's kind of this multifactorial system that helps us keep free from disease. All right, so its major thing is defense of foreign invaders. The integumentary system is important enough to talk on its own. It's basically the skin and the derivatives like the hair and the nails and the glands. Its major function is to protect us from the environment. We'll probably have about a dozen or so other functions we'll talk about when we get to the integumentary system in the next couple of weeks. But basically, its major thing is protection. But there's some other things too, like it, helps to cool the body. It helps to keep the body warm if we need to. It produces vitamin D as an example. So there's a number of other things that we'll look at. But for now, the protection from the external environment is probably the major one that we have. The next one's kind of the weird one, and it's called the musculoskeletal system. So the author that we're using this from, because I think it's the best physiology textbook in some ways, calls the system the musculoskeletal system. So she has combined the muscular system and the skeletal system into one. And there's obvious reasons for that. Support and movement and protection, right, are the big ones. But in some ways, I think it does a disservice because there are three major types of muscle and then subtypes of each one of those. So again, I'll give you a second to think about what are the three major types of muscle. It's a nice little review for your head. Nobody knows if you're right or wrong, so go ahead and give yourself a second to think about it. All right, so what'd you come up with? Hopefully, you came up with skeletal, right? So skeletal muscle, also cardiac muscle, the heart's muscle, and also smooth muscle. So I think that in some ways, by grouping them together, you do sort of sometimes forget about the cardiac and smooth muscle component of it, but I won't let you anyway. So when we do a little bit of muscle stuff, we'll talk about those, compare them, contrast them a little bit later on this semester. And then the last one we're going to talk about very sparingly is the reproductive system. And, it's made up of the reproductive organs, the, ovaries and uterus, primarily in the female, and the testes and penis and male. The major function of the reproductive system is to perpetuate the species, right? To have offspring and keep the species going. So those are the kind of major overview of this. On Canvas, there is an infographic that has a bunch of information on it for the human organ systems. There's also should be a handout with a table that sort of has a lot of this information. So that concludes the first lecture, and we'll move on after the first day to the next ones. So that's it for this one.